Christmas, Markelli Farm viewers. I'm not only surprising Mark, but surprising myself in doing a video by myself as he's not home. We'll see what he thinks when he gets home and interrupts me. But I thought today, since it's a cold, blustery day, we're expecting some very severe negative temperatures. I'm off work today. It's lightly snowing. I have Elf playing on the TV, and me and Brandy are just hanging out since Dad's in town. But I thought I would show you guys the Amish sweet bread recipe that I found maybe about a year ago. And when we're needing some bread and don't feel like driving into town, this is one that's fairly simple to make up yourself. It's got very few ingredients. It's easy, no knead. Just need a little bit of time to let it rise. And so let's get to it. Okay, so one of the first things we do is preheat our oven. We keep our house fairly cold. It's usually around 63, 65 degrees. And so that can kind of mess with the rising time on anything that uses yeast. And I also have our hot water running in our sink because this uses warm water to activate the yeast. So I wanted to get that going as well. So I preheat the oven, lowest setting. Ours actually has a warm feature. So I just put it on the warm feature while I'm prepping this initial step. And then I shut it off when I go to put the bread or the bowl of bread dough into the oven where it proofs its initial time. So let's get going on this. Let me grab some warm water and we'll get started. Okay, so what we have here is 2 cups of warm tap water. I ran it hot and then just moved it down until it got warm enough. You want to be able to stick your hand in it without being overly hot. Too hot and you'll kill the yeast. You want it just warm enough for your yeast. And then we add 2/3 cup of sugar. Into the warm water, and you want that to dissolve. The warm water will also help that dissolve quicker, and the yeast will feed off of the sugar. Give that a stir. Okay, and then with your yeast, we use a lot of yeast, so we buy these bigger packages and keep it in the refrigerator. You can keep it in the freezer as well if you want to. But you want to make sure that your yeast, if it's older, it's going to activate. So in this step, if it doesn't bloom, your yeast is probably too old and you should get yourself some new yeast. So we're going to add 1.5 tablespoons of yeast. There's 1. And I am not one of those people that do exact measurements. I will eyeball stuff. In the world of baking, you're told that's a no-no, but it always works for me. Give that a mix. I'm going to let this sit for a minute or two until I start to see the yeast bloom. In the meantime, I'm going to get the next step's ingredients ready, and we'll be back with you then. Okay, so we've got our water, our sugar, and our yeast mixed up. The bubbles are from stirring. I don't really see any yeast activation, but I'm not that worried about it. That jar is fairly new within the last month, and it doesn't expire until mid-2024. So I'm pretty sure the yeast is okay. We are going to move on to the next step, which is adding in salt. So you want 1.5 teaspoons of salt. We use coarse salt in our house. I've never found it to make that much of a difference unless it's got a large amount of salt in proportion to the rest of the recipe. All right. Now the recipe calls for a 1/4 cup of vegetable oil. Most of the time I bake, I like to use this Kirkland brand organic virgin coconut oil. Let's get this candle there. I found that when we were living back in California and we still had a Costco membership. And I realized I can still get it by ordering it on Amazon. So these are fairly large containers. Each one is 84 fluid ounces. And they sell them in a pack of 2. So it takes a while to go through them, but I buy them in the pack of 2 and it usually lasts us about the year. So I'm going to do that. The thing to know about coconut oil, if you don't already, is that once it gets to 77 degrees, it will liquefy. Below 77 degrees, it hardens. So all you need to do in that case, like it's cold in our house, so ours is already hardened. And so you pull out your measurement, stick it in a microwave safe, or you could even put it in a pan, melt it down for a few seconds. It doesn't have to be completely melted. You can see some chunks in there, but it softens up and it mixes in nicely. I prefer this over vegetable oil or canola oil. The other thing to know about coconut oil is it's going to depend on your brand, how much it tastes like coconut, and it can throw off recipes that you have more of a savory flavor in. So just try your brands out and see which one you like. For sweet desserts, I actually like the Trader Joe's as well, but that one has a very, very strong coconut flavor. So I found this Kirkland brand, the Costco brand, has a light flavor, but not enough to mess with recipes when you use it savory. I use that when I pop my popcorn, and it makes a world of difference. I just love it that way. All right, so now we have our salt and our oil mixed in. And our next step is adding our flour. So let me grab my mixer here, and we'll start adding flour. This recipe calls for 6 cups of flour. You add 1 at a time and stir in until it gets to a consistency that you then need to knead. I don't sift my flour, I don't level it completely. I scoop, flatten it off across the top, and start mixing. Next cup in. And I'll get this all mixed up and come back when we're ready to throw it in the oven to proof. Okay, you guys, I turned the flash on just to get a little more light in here. But this is what it looks like with most of the 5 cups mixed in. You can still see there's flour there, but I wanted to show that as it's mostly coming together, you can still see that it's slightly wet. So we are going to need to use that 6th cup of flour, but how much of that last cup will depend on what this dough looks like. So I'm probably only going to add 1/3 of a cup in at a time and see if we need the full cup. Now let's see what this one does. It's still slightly sticky. So this is cup number 6. Like I said, I'm going to only add part of it in and see if we need to go with anything more. Some flour and a little bit sticking at the bottom, so loosen that up. So this will pick that up. It's drying out. I don't think I'm going to need the rest of that 6 cups of flour. So at this stage, we're just kneading until smooth, trying to incorporate the last of this stuff. Next step after this, after we get it all worked in and it's looking smooth, it goes in a well-oiled bowl and covered with a damp cloth before it goes in the oven to rise, or if it's warm enough on your counter, if you have a spot that works out well to rise your stuff, just sit it there. I'm going to finish this up and then we'll come back once I move it over to another bowl for it to rise in. Okay, so we got that all mixed in. I did end up doing one last sprinkle across the top of it because by the time I worked in that 5 1/3 cup, it was a little sticky, so I added a little bit more. It's perfect now. I oiled the bowl. I used vegetable oil to oil the bowl and made sure I used a brush. You can use your hands, but came all the way up to the lip of the bowl. This will rise. It's supposed to double before you go on to your next step. So I have a wet cloth here. We have these rectangle cloths made out of, I think they're old bed sheets. Pretty sure my mother-in-law made them. My husband inherited them. But I just grabbed one of those, wet it down really good, and this is going to go into the oven. Now remember, when you put it into the oven, you're going to make sure and turn it off. You're not baking the bread at this point. You just made it a warm home to double in. So, going right in there, and we'll check on it in a little while and see if it's doubled. Once it's doubled, we'll move on to the next step, so we'll see you then. Okay, so we are back. It's been about an hour. We are doubled in size, or near doubled in size. So the next step we're going to do is punch it down. You can see all that air in there. Punch it down, knead it a few times, and then we'll split it in half and get it in our pans and let it rise one more time. Just knead it. You can see the shininess is that olive oil that I coated the bowl in before I stuck it in there. This dough is a very, very easy dough to work with. Here I got my 2 bread pans, and I just spray them down with Pam. Make sure you spray the bottom and all sides. Nice round. Move it over so you can see it. Nice round bread. In fact, I'm gonna make it a little oblong, make it easier to have it. Okay, and then I'm just going to use a cutter. Cut it in half. And make it oblong again because it's going to go in your bread pan. And I kind of just stretch a little bit. Don't stretch too much. You can see if you pull on it too much, it kind of breaks. And then when your bread breaks, it doesn't really fill that in, but you can see some air bubbles at the top there. That's okay. And you just let it sit down in that bread pan. As it does its second rise, it'll puff up again and kind of fill in the corners, and then when it bakes, it will definitely fill in the corners. So I'm going to wash my hands because they're greasy, and then I'll throw these in the oven. I'm going to put that wet washcloth or wet bread cloth back over it while it rises. I restarted the oven again to heat it up because it had gotten kind of cool, and we'll let it do its second rise. Okay guys, so I was working on a different project. I had to pull the bread out of the oven so I could use it for something else. And as you can see, it has not only risen, but stuck to my cloth. Now the baking probably had us good and warm in here. But these are about to go into the oven for 30 minutes at 350, and I'll come back when they are done. Okay, so we got these things fresh out of the oven. They're nice and brown on top. And this next step is not part of the recipe, but it's something that I do. Actually learned it from Mark and his Portuguese bread making. Is just to melt some butter and brush it on top right out of the oven. It just helps to keep it moist, and it gives it a shiny look to it, and the little bit of extra salt that's in the butter makes the bread taste really, really good. But that is all that's to it. It's actually not very hard at all. Sorry, I'm thinking of what I have to do next. My mouth isn't working with my brain. Not very hard. Just takes a little bit of time while you wait for things to rise, but I worked on a little project while I was waiting for that. I'll show you guys that in a second. I actually have a service appointment on my truck that I need to get into town for. So that's what they look like. And then let me show you this. While I was working on that, I made a batch of my Amish sugar cookies and packaged them up. The local nursing home reaches out and asks for cards for residents every year at Christmas time. And I have trouble picking just a certain number, so I do one for every resident. They're pre-made cards that I had to order off of Amazon because I couldn't locally source them, but each one's filled out and signed for us. Each resident will get one of those and one of the cookies. And then because they do an amazing job of taking care of all their residents, not only at Christmas but the rest of the year, I did up a tray for their nursing staff. And because I know this bugs people on our channel, here is the recipe. So pause and write it down, screenshot it. If need be, I can put it in the description once Mark posts this. But there it is. Very few ingredients, very few steps, super easy, just takes a little bit of time. So until next time you think you can get me on camera, I wish you guys a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, safe travels, stay warm if you're in a cold climate, stay cool if you're in a warm climate, and we'll see you next time.